Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas and today we're looking at basically F1's talented, skillful driver of his era. Very talented in whatever car you put him in. And that guy was Jim Clark. Clark was born on the 4th of March 1936 and was born into a farming family at Kermy House Farm in Fife, Scotland. The youngest child of five and the only boy. When Clark was 6 in 1942, family moved to Egerton Main Farm near Duns, Berkshire, in the Borders. Clark was then educated at primary schools in Kermy and then in Churnside. Following 3 years of preparatory schooling at Clinton Hall School in Edinburgh, he was sent to Loretto School in Musselburgh, East Lothian. Although his parents was opposed to the idea, Clark started his racing in local road rallies and hill climb events, driving his own Sunbeam Comet, and proved a fearsome competitor right from the start. On the 16th of June 1956, in his very first event, he was behind the wheel of a DKW Scots rally at Kinroyd, Scotland. By 1958, Clark was driving for the local Border Weavers team for Ian Scott Watson, racing Jaguar D-types and Porsches in national events and winning 18 races. Then on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas 1958, Clark raced against the man that would launch him to superstardom in his career. Driving a Lotus Elite, he finished second to Colin Chapman. Chapman was the head man of Lotus and would later influence Clark's career in a 10-lap GT race at Brands Hatch. In 1959, Clark drove a Lotus Elise, finishing 10th at Le Mans, partnered with John Whitmore and the ex-Brute Halford Lester Jaguar, winning the Brutus Hill Climb. Chapman was sufficiently impressed to give Clark a ride in one of his former junior cars, and the first race of the season was Goodwood. Clark won from John Surtees in a Cooper BMC, with Trevor Taylor in another Lotus third. Clark made his F1 debut in the third race of the F1 season at Zandvoort, Holland. They had Innes Island and Anastasia as two drivers, but they also had back then teams to get into multiple cars. They couldn't get John Surtees to drive as he was busy racing his motorbikes at the Ironman TT, so they got Clark. Clark retired on lap 49 with final dry fire, and then his second F1 race was the 1960 Belgian Grand Prix at the extremely fast but fearsome and most dangerous track of Spa-Francorchamps. He got a taste of reality when two fatal accidents occurred between Chris Bristow and Anastasia. I covered this in depth in a previous podcast. Even though Clark finished 5th and scored his first championship points, it was not the best of weekends, but he did get 5th in France, a down 16th place in Britain, 3rd in Portugal. The team boycotted Italy because of safety concerns, but 16th in America. Reigned in Lotus for a full season in 1961. 10th place in Monaco, followed by a podium with 3rd place at Zandvoort. Then 12th at Spa, followed by 3rd in France. Then retired from the British Grand Prix at Aintree, followed by 4th in Italy. But at the 1961 Italian Grand Prix, Clark was involved in one of the worst accidents in the history of F1. Clark collided with Wolfgang von Trips on lap 2 of the race. Von Trips' car was heavier because he was driving a Ferrari, whereas Clark's Lotus was lighter. The two touched and crashed. Clark was okay, but Von Trips, his car went airborne and crashed into a side barrier, killing Von Trips and 15 spectators. there was a lot of hoo-ha because of Clark being charged with manslaughter and Lotus having their car impounded as a result of the investigation. In 1962, Lotus brought in the Lotus 35. Clark led at Zandvoort, but then had problems and finished ninth. Retired from Monaco, but then won his first Grand Prix at Belgium before retiring in France and then winning in Britain at Aintree, but then stalled at the start of the German Grand Prix when he failed to switch on the fuel pumps. Retired from Italy and then won in America, but that put him in a close title battle with Graham Hill, driving for BRM. And at the last race of the season in South Africa, Clark led, and then a loose bolt came out of the engine, causing the engine to blow up. That led Clark to finish second in the championship, behind Hill, who won the race. But in 1963, Clark would show everyone what it's worth. An 8th place in Monaco did not help his season start, but he went on to win 7 of the 10 races, with victories coming in Belgium, Holland, France, Britain, a 2nd place in Germany, a win in Italy, 3rd in America, followed by victories in Mexico and South Africa. 7 out of 10 wins that year, and was not equalled until 1984 when Aaron Prost equalled it with 7 wins, and was not broken until Ayrton Senna won 8 races in 1988. And because the championship in 63 had 10 rounds, Clark had a 70% success rate. Also that season, Clark tried the Indy 500 and finished second behind Parnell Jones and won Rookie of the Year, but it was controversial. Before the race, USAC officials had told the drivers they would black flag any car that was seen to be leaking oil on the track. Later in the race, Jones's front engine roadster developed a crack in the oil tank and began to leak oil. Although it began pretty slippery, resulted in a number of cars spinning, led to Eddie Sachs crashing into oil. USAC officials were set to black flag Jones after the Sachs crash until his car owner, J.C. Egg Jr., went down pit lane and somehow convinced them that the oil leak was below the level of a normal crack and would not leak any further. Chapman accused USAC officials of being biased because Clark and Lotus were a British team with a rear engine car. Motor journalist and author Brock Yates believed that it was an American driver and car in second place instead of Clark in the British Lotus. The officials would have black flagged Jones, but neither Lotus nor the engine supplier Ford protested the result, reasoning that winning as a result of disqualification when Jones led would not be received well by the public. Out of the drives in 63, Clark's best drive was in Belgium. His win at Belgium in 63 was in extremely foggy and rainy conditions. Started 8th, passed all the cars in front of him, including early leader Graham Hill. About 70 laps into the race, rain came down harder than ever. Clark lapped the entire field except for Bruce McLaren, who was driving a Cooper in second, and was almost 5 minutes ahead of McLaren, and this would be the first of 7 victories for Clark that year. In 1964, Clark would win 3 races, Holland, Belgium and Britain, all of which in the Lotus 25, but he had 4 reliability failures that year. First in France, then in Germany, then in Austria, then in Italy. But that allowed Ferrari's John Surtees and BRM's Graham Hill to take it right down to the wire at the end of the season in Mexico. Hill was taken out by Bandini. We think it was well, some of the British fans think it was Ferrari international assistance to help Surtees out, but that meant it handed it over to Clark. But an oil leak from the Climax engine robbed the Clark of the title with a couple of laps to go, and that meant the title was handed back to Hill. But then Ferrari basically gave team orders to Bandini to let Surtees through. That meant Surtees went on to win the championship in a race won by Dangani. Clark qualified on the pole at Indianapolis in '64, but tyre failure damage cost Clark the win and led to a massive argument between Ford and Lotus because Chapman wanted different spec tyres. Ford were not happy, but they rebuilt the relationship for 1965, which Clark won the 500. Clark had to skip the Monaco Grand Prix as a result, but he won in South Africa, Belgium, France in the 25 after engine problems in the 33, also won in Britain, Holland and Germany, although reliability problems cost him in the final 3 races in Italy, America and Mexico. On 54 points was Clark's second championship. In 1966, the regulations changes, 3 litres came into force. Clark had to make do with a 2-litre Country Climax engine in the Lotus 33, but he did not score points to the British Grand Prix, where he finished down in 4th. He led at Zandvoort until overheating issues hampered him and finished 3rd. And then basically in Germany retired, but then had to make do with the Lotus 43 with the P75 H16 engine. Retired in Italy, won in America, the only time that an H16 engine ever won, and then retired in Mexico. I'll do an H16 video at a later stage. 1967, the H16 was used again in South Africa but retired. Then used the Country Climax 2-litre engine in Monaco but retired. But he had the Cosworth DFE engine in the Lotus 49. Won at Zandvoort first time out, despite that he'd never driven the car till practice, because Clark had moved from Britain to France because of tax purposes, and he couldn't get back into the UK for 12 months because of the tax reasons. Led at Spa, and then mechanical problems with the DFE, later in finishing 6th, although the engines were rebuilt prior to Spa because only 2 still existed at that stage. Retired at France, won at Silverstone, but then retired from Germany with suspension damage and electrical problems after a wet weather drive in Canada. Clark then did the greatest drive of his career, and that was basically the 1967 Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Starting from pole, Clark was leading when he had a tyre puncture. He lost a lap having his wheel changed in the pits. Rejoining 16th place, he advanced through the field progressively, lowering the lap record, eventually equaling his pole time. To regain the last lap and the lead, that's what he did. He was narrowly ahead of Jack Brabham and John Surtees. But on the last lap of the race, his car was not filled enough with enough fuel. It faltered and coasted across the line in 3rd place behind Surtees, who pipped Brabham at the line. But Clark won the final 2 races, but it wasn't enough to beat Denny Hulme to the championship. Clark won the opening round in South Africa, and he basically was looking for another great season. Sadly though, on 7th of April 1968, Clark died in a racing accident in Hockenheim, West Germany. During the 4-month gap after the first F1 race, drivers would compete in other formulas. Clark was originally slated to drive in a BOC 1000 km sports car race, but instead chose to drive a Formula 2 race at the Hockenheim ring for Lotus due to contractual obligations with Firestone. Although the race has sometimes been characterised as a minor race meeting, it was impressive. Top warning matches for French drivers Beltros and Pesquero, Technos for Carlo Flutie and future F1 driver Clay Rexoni, Brabhams for Derek Bell and Piers Courage, Ferrari for Chris Amon, McLaren's for Graham Lawrence and Robin Widows. Lotus had Clark and Hill, and a young Max Mosley was also in the race. The event was in 2 heats. Clark was not happy about the cold weekend. He said he'll try and get the car to the race. And then on the 5th lap of the race, Clark, who was running 4th or 5th, veered off the track and crashed into the trees. Clark suffered a broken neck and skull fracture and died before reaching hospital. The cause of the crash was never definitively identified, but investigators concluded it was most likely due to a deflating rear tyre. Clark's death affected the racing community. Fellow F1 drivers and close friends, Graham Hill, Jackie Stewart, Dan Gurney, John Surtees, Chris Amon and Jack Brabham, all being personally affected by the tragedy. People came from all over the world to Clark's funeral in Scotland. Chapman was devastated and publicly stated he had lost his best friend. 68 Championship was subsequently won by Clark's teammate Graham Hill, who pulled the heartbroken team together and held off Clark's fellow Scotsman Jackie Stewart for the crown, which Hill later dedicated to Clark. The accident will basically live on forever. What caused it? Initial speculation was caused by driver error or deflating tyre. A Lotus was investigated further by aircraft crash investigators for 3 weeks. Many drivers, including Surtees and Brabham, convinced it caused by deflating rear tyre and adamant it was not a driver error simply because they believe Clark was not capable of making such a mistake. According to Andrew Marriott, who was covering the race as a young reporter, death in the sport was a regular occurrence in those days, but surely someone of Clark's sublime talent and skill. People reckon the rear tyre had deflated and there was another theory that the mechanical metering unit on the FVA engine on the Cosworth had seized. There's a memorial at Clark's accident site that the crash, actual location of the crash is in a heavily wooded area. 33 poles, 25 wins in 72 starts. Best result at Le Mans was second in class in 1959, but third overall in 1960 in an Aston Martin DB1. Clark also won the 1964 British Touring Car Championship, participated in the RIC Rally in 66. He only took it in one NASCAR race in 1967 at Wockenham, but wasn't the best. But he had a reputation of mastering difficult sports cars. And Clark had the ability to adapt to whichever car he was driving, whilst other drivers would find a good car setup. Clark would usually set better for that time, whether setup was provided, and asked for the car to be left as it was. So Jackie Stewart said that Clark was such a good driver. He was so smooth, so clean, he drove so finessed. He never bullied a racing car. He sort of careened it into doing things he never wanted it to do. Chris Amon said that when Clark died, if it could happen to him, what chance do the rest of us have? I think we all felt that it seems like we lost our leader. And Clark did have lots of other success. In the Tasman series, he won 3 times in 65, 67, 68 for Lotus. and he had a very good career. This is Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas. Thank you for listening. Remember, like, share, subscribe for more great content. Gareth Thomas, goodbye.